the petition on the need for a general election, and I'll call Patrick Hurley first.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. This petition presents itself as the voice of democratic urgency. In truth, it's something we're far more familiar with, and something that is far less noble. It's the impulse of the toddler. But a democracy cannot be run like a nursery. Because here's the truth. You don't get something simply because you want it. Yeah.
Is he seriously saying, because his attitude, I have to say, is unbelievably patronising, is he seriously saying that the over 1 million people across the UK who signed this petition are basically all children who don't know what they're doing? Because that's his implication, which is deeply insulting to 1 million plus people, including our constituents.
You've got 1 million people sign a petition? How many people vote in the general election? Well more than 1 million people. They might not like it, but it's true.
Well, your police don't like it either.
They do not include a rolling plebiscite triggered whenever a sufficiently large group of people become bored, frustrated, impatient, or whether they've had a video clip shared to them on the WhatsApp. Yeah?
I feel the honourable member might acknowledge that in the history of petitions debates, that the two most highly subscribed to debates have been asking for a general election in this Parliament. Would he acknowledge the fact that even the fact that both of those petitions had over £1 million, people signing the petition, illustrates the huge frustration out there at this current government that they do want the government to change course?
The petitioners who have put their names to this petition, they say, well, the people want change. They are not the majority of the people in this country. There are tens and tens of millions of people in this country, and 1 million signed this petition. And here's the news. The people actually got change in 2024. 18 months ago, we got a government that explicitly said it wasn't just going to go and put sticking plasters on the gaping wounds of the previous 14 years. The self-harming referendum, which has done this country no favours whatsoever. In every part... Go on, if he must.
He may recall that 17.3 million people voted in that referendum, peacefully and democratically, to leave the European Union, which is a lot more people than voted for Labour in the last general election. So if he's not prepared to respect the opinion of 1 million people who've signed this petition, and he's all about numbers today, would you respect the opinion of 17.3 million people who voted to leave the EU, or is that not a big enough number for him either?
Those people voted in good faith, and they were lied to by people like him.
I beg your pardon?
Inadvertently. Inadvertently lied. I will withdraw.
No, you must withdraw.
I will withdraw.
What unfolds in this chamber is not a procedural disagreement or a clash of policy detail. It is a struggle over legitimacy itself, who gets to speak for the people, who gets to define democracy, and who gets to decide when public frustration crosses from inconvenience into something that must be answered. The exchange begins calmly, but beneath the surface, authority is already being weaponized. From the outset, the framing is deliberate. The petition is not addressed on its merits but on its character. It is recast as emotional impulse rather than civic expression, an act of impatience rather than participation. This rhetorical move matters. By reducing the act of signing a petition to childish behaviour, the Speaker establishes a hierarchy, Parliament as the rational adult, the public as the impulsive child. Once that hierarchy is accepted, everything that follows becomes easier to justify. This is a classic institutional manoeuvre. You do not deny the existence of dissent. You redefine it as answer IOUs. You do not argue with the demand. You diminish the capacity of those making it. In doing so, authority is preserved without ever engaging substance. The chamber becomes not a forum for representation, but a filter, deciding which expressions of public will are mature enough to count. The immediate pushback exposes the fault line. The objection is not merely about tone. It is about respect. When the number of petitioners is raised, it is not used as evidence of legal mandate, but as evidence of political reality. 1 million signatures are not invoked as a trigger for action, but as a signal, a warning light indicating widespread frustration. The refusal to acknowledge that signal is where the conflict escalates. What follows is a shift from moral framing to numerical framing. Numbers are deployed selectively, not to clarify democratic principles, but to narrow them. Participation is measured only through elections, and everything else is treated as background noise. This is not accidental. Elections are the moment when power is safely transferred within predefined rules. Petitions are unpredictable. They bypass party structures, media cycles, and leadership control. They are inconvenient by design. By insisting that only elections count, institutional authority shields itself from intermediate accountability. Public sentiment becomes something to be tolerated between elections, not engaged with. The underlying message is clear: frustration is permitted, but only on a schedule approved by those in power. As the exchange intensifies, the language hardens. Public discontent is reframed as boredom, impatience, or manipulation by viral media. This reframing serves a dual purpose. First, it delegitimizes the motivation of the petitioners. Second, it shifts blame away from governance and onto culture, suggesting that dissatisfaction is not the result of policy outcomes, but of emotional volatility and online influence. This is where power subtly tightens its grip. If dissent is caused by immaturity or misinformation, then it does not require response, only management. The state does not need to listen. It needs to wait for the noise to pass. The counterargument challenges this containment strategy directly. It introduces historical comparison, not to reopen past debates, but to expose inconsistency. If numbers matter, they must matter consistently. If participation confers legitimacy, it cannot be selectively honoured. This is not an appeal to revisit outcomes, but a demand for coherence. At this point, the atmosphere changes. What was framed as procedural reasoning gives way to accusation. The suggestion that voters were misled reframes democratic participation itself as compromised. This is a dangerous escalation. Once voters are portrayed as having acted under deception, their choices can be dismissed without directly attacking democracy. Because the system remains intact, only the public's judgment is questioned. This move reveals the deeper institutional reflex at work. When confronted with inconvenient expressions of public will, whether through petitions or referenda, the response is not to reassess authority, but to reinterpret consent. Consent becomes conditional, valid only when it aligns with acceptable outcomes. The forced withdrawal that follows is not merely about parliamentary language. It is a boundary being enforced. The chamber reminds everyone watching that while arguments may be heated, there are limits to how far truth claims can go when they threaten institutional stability. Accountability is permitted, but only up to the point where it does not destabilize the structure itself. What we are witnessing is not chaos, but control under pressure. Every intervention, every dismissal, every reframing serves to keep power centralized and insulated. The petition is never truly debated. Instead, it is neutralized, reduced to impulse, minimized by scale, and overshadowed by procedural authority. This opening segment establishes the central tension of the entire exchange: a public seeking recognition beyond the ballot box, and an institution determined to confine democracy to moments it can manage. From here, the conflict will not be about numbers or process alone, but about whether authority listens or merely endures. As the exchange moves forward, something important becomes clear. This is no longer about the petition itself. The document has already served its purpose. It has drawn a line between governed and governors, between those who express dissatisfaction and those who reserve the right to define when dissatisfaction matters. From this point on, the conversation is about containment. Authority, when challenged, rarely collapses in dramatic fashion. Instead, it tightens. It narrows definitions. It reinforces boundaries. We see that process unfolding here with precision. The insistence that the people already got change is not a factual clarification. It is a closure statement. It is designed to end discussion rather than advance it. This is a crucial shift. The argument moves from whether public frustration exists to whether it is still allowed to be relevant. By invoking a recent electoral outcome, institutional power asserts that public consent has been fully expressed and is therefore exhausted. Any further expression becomes surplus, redundant at best, destabilizing at worst. This framing transforms democracy from a continuous relationship into a transactional event. Participation is valid only at designated moments, and once exercised, it must remain dormant. The petition, in this logic, is not an extension of democratic engagement, but an attempt to renegotiate a contract that has already been signed. What makes this moment particularly revealing is the way scale is used defensively. Millions become only millions when they threaten authority. The population is invoked not to amplify concern, but to dilute it. By emphasizing how many people did not sign the petition, the argument suggests that silence equals consent, a powerful but deeply flawed assumption. Silence, in democratic systems, is often ambiguous. It can indicate satisfaction, resignation, disengagement, or lack of access. But here, silence is treated as endorsement. This allows authority to claim majority support without demonstrating it, while dismissing visible dissent as statistically insignificant. The exchange exposes a familiar institutional blind spot, the inability to distinguish legality from legitimacy. Yes, elections confer legal authority, but legitimacy is sustained, or eroded, in the space between elections. Petitions, protests, public pressure, and civic engagement exist precisely because democratic systems recognize that legitimacy is not static. Rather than acknowledging this, the response treats ongoing public input as a threat to stability. The language used, frustration, impatience, boredom, subtly criminalizes emotional response. It suggests that dissatisfaction itself is irresponsible, something to be managed rather than understood. This is where escalation psychology becomes visible. When authority feels secure, it tolerates criticism. When it feels cornered, it reframes criticism as irrational. By attributing public sentiment to social media clips and fleeting outrage, the institution absolves itself of responsibility. If the problem is attention spans, then policy outcomes no longer need to be examined. The counter-intervention challenges this narrative by forcing a comparison that authority would rather avoid. Numbers are brought back into the conversation not as abstract statistics, but as evidence of selective respect. This is a destabilizing move because it exposes inconsistency, and institutions rely heavily on the appearance of consistency to maintain credibility. The moment the discussion turns to past mass participation, the stakes change. This is no longer about a petition. It is about precedent. If large-scale democratic participation is only respected when its outcome aligns with institutional preference, then democracy becomes conditional. The rules remain the same, but their application does not. At this stage, the tone shifts from dismissive to defensive. The response no longer minimizes numbers. It challenges the integrity of the decision-making process itself. By suggesting that participants were misled, authority reframes the past to protect the present. This is a powerful maneuver because it avoids confronting the choice while undermining its legitimacy. But this move carries risk. Once you argue that democratic outcomes are invalid because voters were deceived, you open the door to perpetual reinterpretation. Any inconvenient result can later be discredited, not by evidence, but by narrative. Truth becomes negotiable. Consent becomes provisional. The forced withdrawal that follows is a visible assertion of control, but also an implicit admission of fragility. Language must be regulated because words shape legitimacy. Accusations of deception strike at the heart of democratic trust, and institutions move quickly to contain them, not necessarily because they are false, but because they are destabilizing. Throughout this segment, what is absent is just as telling as what is present. There is no exploration of why frustration exists, no acknowledgement of lived consequences, no curiosity about public sentiment. The system is speaking about the public, not with it. By the end of this section, the positions are entrenched. Authority has chosen procedural closure over engagement. Dissent has been acknowledged only to be dismissed. The conflict is no longer overt, but structural, embedded in how democracy is defined, limited, and defended. What remains unresolved is the most dangerous element of all. When people feel heard only at intervals and ignored in between, pressure does not disappear. It accumulates. And institutions that mistake endurance for legitimacy often discover too late that silence was never consent. It was simply waiting. By the final moments of this exchange, the tension is no longer contained within individual remarks. It has hardened into a structural standoff between public expression and institutional authority. What began as a discussion about a petition has evolved into a demonstration of how systems protect themselves when challenged, not through transparency or engagement, but through procedural dominance and narrative control. The enforced withdrawal is often perceived as a minor parliamentary formality. In reality, it functions as a pressure valve. It allows the institution to restore order without addressing the substance of what was said. The accusation is removed, but the underlying issue remains unresolved. This is not conflict resolution, it is conflict suspension. What matters here is not whether the claim was fair or accurate, but why it could not remain on the record. Claims about deception strike at the foundation of representative legitimacy. If voters were misled, then authority becomes conditional, fragile, and open to reassessment. The system responds instinctively, not by disproving the claim, but by erasing it. This reveals a deeper truth about power dynamics within democratic institutions. Authority is most comfortable engaging with opposition when that opposition operates within familiar boundaries. Procedural objections, polite dissent, technical critiques. But when opposition begins to question the authenticity of consent itself, those boundaries tighten rapidly. Throughout this exchange, we see repeated reliance on formalism as a shield. Procedure is used not as a neutral framework, but as a mechanism of control. Who can speak, how they can speak, and what language is permissible all serve to maintain hierarchy. The result is a space where debate exists, but only in forms that do not threaten the structure that hosts it. This dynamic has real-world consequences. When public frustration is consistently reframed as immaturity or manipulation, trust erodes. People do not disengage because they are apathetic. They disengage because they feel unheard. And when disengagement grows, institutions often misinterpret it as satisfaction, reinforcing the very behavior that caused the disengagement in the first place. The exchange also exposes how easily democratic language can be repurposed to justify exclusion. Phrases like "the people have already decided" sound inclusive, but they function to silence ongoing participation. Democracy becomes something that happened, not something that continues to happen. The public is granted a voice, then asked to put it away. What is striking is the absence of curiosity. No one asks what the petitioners are experiencing. No one acknowledges the emotional or material conditions that might drive such a response. The system does not inquire, it instructs. This asymmetry, between those who must explain themselves and those who need not, is a hallmark of institutional imbalance. As the discussion closes, authority remains intact, but legitimacy has been quietly weakened. The chamber has demonstrated its ability to withstand criticism, but not its willingness to absorb it. This distinction matters. Systems that prioritize stability over responsiveness often appear strong until they are tested in ways procedure cannot contain. The broader pattern is familiar. Small dismissals accumulate. Each instance of minimized concern, each reframing of dissent as inconvenience, contributes to a growing disconnect. Individually, these moments seem insignificant. Collectively, they reshape the relationship between citizens and institutions. What this exchange ultimately reveals is not a failure of democracy, but a narrowing of it. Democratic mechanisms remain in place, but their spirit is constrained. Participation is permitted, but only within carefully managed boundaries. Expression is allowed, but its impact is limited. This is how authority maintains itself without overt repression. It does not silence voices outright, it categorizes them. It does not deny participation, it postpones relevance. Over time, this creates a culture where people speak, but do not expect to be heard, where engagement becomes performative rather than consequential. The danger lies not in disagreement, but in detachment. When people conclude that formal avenues of expression change nothing, they seek alternatives, or withdraw entirely. Neither outcome strengthens democracy. Both are symptoms of a system that listens selectively. As the exchange ends, nothing has been resolved. The petition remains dismissed. The frustration remains unaddressed. Authority remains confident. But beneath the procedural calm, a deeper question lingers, not spoken, but felt. A system that can endure criticism without absorbing it may appear resilient. But resilience without responsiveness is not strength. It is delay. And history shows that when delay replaces dialogue for too long, the consequences arrive not as debate, but as rupture. This is not the end of a conversation. It is the moment when a conversation is refused.